What's up, everyone? It is time for me to get done what I started in October. Time really flew by. Customers are more important than my own stuff. It's called work integrity. So if a bike was ordered and a person was waiting on it, I would take time out of my busy day to make sure that person got their bike, because that's what it's all about. Helping other motorized bicyclists become motorized bicyclists or keep being a motorized bicyclist. But anyway, a quick review. Back in October, I was doing starting to do my fall maintenance. My personal first step is to take my bicycle to the car wash and wash all the road grime and oil and dirt off of it. Your rotating parts don't like that. The road grime and grit is like sandpaper. So if it gets into your rotating parts, eats them up that much faster, then you're buying parts that much sooner. So if you take a little time out of your day to keep your bike clean, you don't have that problem. Alright, well, let's get this thing chucked up in the stand and get started on the fall maintenance. Before I get started, I just want to take one last opportunity. It is the last day of 2020 to thank everybody that's watched my videos. I hope they've helped some people out with problems they were having. We're all in this together. I want everybody that has a motorized bike that has a question or a problem to get their problem solved so they can get back to riding. That's what these things are all about. All right, now that I've got the bike racked up on the bike rack, let's get back there and see what we got to do for a little maintenance. Moving on to the maintenance. Okay, before we get started on this, let me give you a little history of this particular bike. It is my personal bike. It is 7+ years old. It has approximately around 8,000 miles on it. It is all the original equipment from the original build. Haven't had to piece and part anything together in all those miles. The only thing that has changed is I did wear out the tires. So I did put a new set of tires on it. I do believe last year. And that is a new rear wheel. Now, I didn't break the rear wheel or flatten it or tear any spokes out of it or anything. Time and mileage. Everything wears out from time and miles. I noticed that when it has a coaster brake set up on it, so I noticed when I applied the brakes that I had to pedal backwards a little further than normal from the stock wheel. So I knew that the little steel brake shoes in there were getting wore because I had to move the pedal farther to open up the brake shoes farther to stop the bike. So I just went ahead and replaced the back wheel. And this one is 2 years old now. All right, I just wanted to share that little story because most of my customers, most of my videos also, are ways for you to get longevity out of your bike. I don't want to spend money upon money to keep something going. I wouldn't want that. I don't know why anyone would want that. So if you take care of your equipment, which I do, then you don't have to repair it all the time. Now, for you folks who are just now watching this video, thinking about getting a motorized bike and think to yourself, man, I don't want to have to do all that maintenance all the time. They're not high maintenance. This particular maintenance that I'm going to give it for the winter time is what I refer to as the full-blown maintenance, because we go riding for high mileage rides, not just a block here and there. We'll get out and go 25, 30, 40 miles on a round trip just for something to do, get a couple folks together, that kind of thing. So I want to be darn sure when I get out there that I'm coming back. Things happen, but things really go bad if you let them go, don't catch them, get out 15 miles and have to push all the way back or get a ride. Nobody wants that. I don't want that. Okay, so anyway, let's roll on over and start. Now, I personally like to start at one end, work my way to the other. That way I don't forget, I don't need a checklist, all that good stuff, and I don't miss anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is rotate my wheel, see if it has any grinding or unnecessary tightness. I don't want to feel any sand or road grit in my bearings. Then I'm going to shake the wheel left and right a little bit and see if I have any play on my axle shaft and bearing. And as you can see, I do not. So I'm going to take the front wheel off and lube the front bearings. On this part, you need to be really careful. Some wheels are caged bearings, some are open bearings. This wheel is open bearings, which means the ball bearings are just laying in there. So you don't want to grab your wrenches and just spin that out, because the wheel bearings will bounce all over the floor, get lost, and then you're turning maintenance into a big pain. So what you'll want to do is just take your trusty wrenches, back that up enough to see the bearings, but not wide enough for them to go rolling out. I don't know if you can see those yet or not. I think I can get another turn on it, because I don't want that happening to me either. They're still lubed up pretty good, but we're going to give them a little more, being we took the effort to take it off. So how I personally do it, almost like packing a wheel bearing for a car, I will just keep packing it in there with this tiny screwdriver. Wipe it on the lip and poke it down in there. And I will repeat on both sides and all the way around. And then I'm positive that my wheel bearings are properly lubricated. Now that I have both sides lubed and the bearings are packed with grease, I will take my trusty 2 wrenches. And you don't want to over tighten these. You just don't want any slack in your axle. You don't want it to wobble side to side. You don't want any play that way, but you want it to turn really free without any drag, without any pull. You want it to spin free. So I got that one just a smidge tight. Spins nice and free and easy. No wobbling of the axle, so we should have it just perfect and ready to install right after I wipe off the excess grease, because who wants that slinging all over the bike? And the answer to that is no one. Just want to lube the bearing, not the entire bike. Got our trusty front wheel reinstalled and tightened up. She spins just happily and smooth. Also, let me let that go by and I'll grab a spoke. Instead of trying to hold your handlebars and the thing getting all wobbly to check your bearing play, I just grab the spoke and the fork and just give it a little tug. And then we'll get down here, give it a little tug. Don't see any play, spins free. So we're good in that department and moving on. So now I will move on to my trusty 10mm wrench and just check the nuts and bolts. Still snug. Still snug. Check my engine bolts. Still snug. Still snug. Don't over tighten them. They are small and they will strip on you. For a little tip while I'm at it, for those of you like myself that have the small studs, don't fret if your motor is mounted correctly and you keep things tight. You don't have any problems. Like I said, this one's got 8,000 miles on it in 7 years. So if you're a person that has the small studs, don't fret about it. Everybody's always talking about the big 8mm studs these days. If you have them, that's fine, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Little tip while I'm at it, and your motor's new and your exhaust gasket is new, everybody thinks it's vibration that makes your exhaust loose in the very beginning. That is not the case. It is heating and contracting of the exhaust gasket. The gasket gets hot, cooks, flattens out a little bit, makes the exhaust loose. So after your first tank full, if you have a brand new bike, a good tip is to give those a little snugging, be it studs or a bolt and a Allen head or hex head, whatever they're calling those these days. I personally just double nutted it after my first tightening to ensure, because it was just a simple enough fix. All right, now I will get my trusty screwdriver from the toolbox right after I show you the floor, and I will just check my engine bolts just to make sure they're tight. Just as simple as that. Some engines these days come with the hex head bolts, but this one's still got the Phillips head screws and everything's still working properly, so if it's not broke, don't fix it. Now check my rear engine mounts. Oops. Flip the wrench around the correct way. Still tight. And get that last one in there. Still tight. So I know I'm in good shape that way. Another little friendly tidbit. I've seen people in the past complain about these little carburetors leaking. When they first build the bike, much like the exhaust gasket, the base gasket for the bowl has never seen any fuel of any kind. So after it sees a little fuel and oil mix, it gets a little soft. I think it shrinks a little bit, to be honest with you, besides getting a little soft. And you'll have to tighten up your bowl. Screws right there, as soon as I get out of the shadow. Nothing real major, just give them a little snugging. Same thing with your drain. Just check it, make sure it's still snug. And these carburetors usually don't drip a drop of gas. When that is sweating, that is always the case. No one has ever tightened them up from brand new out of the box. The gasket shrank a little bit and it's sweating fuel out of it and drooling down it. Because once again, I must reiterate, this one's 7 years old and, as you can see, not dripping a drop of gas. All right, I won't drag you through it all, but I will re-torque. And if you don't have a torque wrench, I suggest just make sure you snug your head bolts up. That is another thing that heats and contracts from brand new out of the box. If you've ran it and did not check them when you built your bike, check them now, and I'll bet they turn a little bit because the gasket between the head and the jug meet gets hot, shrinks a little bit, needs tightened back down or re-torqued to ensure your bike starts easily and every time. I'll also check my intake bolts just to make sure they're snug. Like I said, don't over tighten them. And then I will check the play in my clutch actuator lever. If this has a bunch of slop before you it gets to where it stops going that way, I would suggest loosening your cable lock if you have one, sliding it up, taking all the slack out of your clutch cable. It'll work a lot better for you. Also, another little tip is if you're a person that is relying solely on that little set screw that comes with some engine kits, most definitely get rid of that and get a cable lock. Why is because these usually strip when you're snugging them down. The only way to get them out is to drill it to get your cable out, because you can't move it. It's holding it firmly in there. When you drill the hole, kills the cable. Now you got to get a clutch lock and a cable. So to spare your expense of buying both and having to do the drilling and the pain of that, just get rid of that screw, put a cable lock on it, and problem solved. Just a friendly little tidbit. Not saying that's the cure-all, but it does make your life a lot better when you got to adjust your clutch cable. All right. I will check my pulley for my chain to make sure it does not have a lot of play in it. They are not perfect machined with absolutely no play, but if it's super wobbling, you know it's time to replace it. So that little dude is in good shape still. All right. Now we will remove the back wheel, grease the wheel bearings in the rear wheel. A friendly little suggestion I'd like to share. Before I remove my back wheel, I like to take a marker and just mark where my nut was to help me. This one's still marked from times gone past. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it is a starting point from where everything was perfectly lined up and not rubbing anything. So it might assist you putting your back wheel back on, put it back in the marks, and then you won't have any problems and have to adjust, readjust, and adjust some more. Just a friendly little suggestion. So now I'm going to take off my chain. I'll flip my tensioner up and pull my wheel off. Get it queued up in the vise so I can show you how I personally lube my bearings. Much like the front wheel, back wheel has a couple extra little tidbits you got to deal with. So we're going to get rid of our brake arm. Set that right there for safekeeping. Take our magnet. See if that'll help us get. Good God, it's stuck everything but what I'm trying to stick to. My dust cover, as you can see, still lubricated from the last time, so that's a good sign. Not running dry. Now the trick of the rear wheel is just like the trick of the front wheel. In meaning, if you just screw the guts out of it, how the rear coaster brake works, it's interlocked in there. So you have a heck of a time trying to find the spot where the brake shoes and the cog in there interlock. So to prohibit yourself from having that problem, because if you're a person who's just spun that axle out of there and the guts fell out, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So you got to be careful when you're doing that. So we are going to just loosen it enough to expose the bearings, just like the front ones, so we can pack it with grease. I'll use that as my other wrench. Now that that's loose, I will spin that out just a little bit. I personally always hold pressure against the guts, if you will, from the backside. And I will do the same thing on the other side when I grease it, in addition to this side. Because I want just enough of a crack in there, just like I have now. See, not a lot of play. Might even give myself one more turn. But I don't want to back those parts out either, because I don't want to have to fool with getting them back in there. So just like the front wheel, I will take my bearing grease and pack it into where the bearings are and the bearing race. Because if you keep dabbing it like that, the grease does work in the bearings. There's my bearings. You can see the grease is going in there. I'll just keep dabbing / packing it in there. All right, I'm gonna finish that little tidbit and be right back. Now that I have that bearing packed and I went to the other side and packed the other bearing, I'm going to reinstall my dust cover if I don't drop it in the dirt. I put a little fresh grease on there, but I noticed that it has made its own little grease gasket, if you will. And that will help keep the water and dirt out because it can't get through the grease gasket. That's just a happy little coincidence. I just noticed that when I went over to put some fresh grease on it. That will keep some grease against my bearing all the time. So I should be good for a long period of time and not have to do this again. But now I know, after a summer of riding, thousands of miles, night trips and day trips, that my bearings are still in great shape. I'm not running dry to eat themselves up and wear out my wheel to where I got to spend another $65 on a wheel, which is not what I want to do. I want my wheel to last forever if I can possibly help it. All right, snug those back up. Just like the front wheel, got to adjust my bearings, the cones, if you will, to where I get a nice smooth flow, which is right there. No play and a nice smooth flow. That's what we're going for. I think I'll give it just a smidgen more because they do warm up a little bit, so they will grow. Not to the naked eye, but they will. Okay, check that to make sure I have no play. Turns freely. All right, put my axle nut on. It's ready to reinstall on the bike. Alrighty then, moving forward. The marks on the frame helped immensely in relining the wheel. I put it back in the marks that I made on the frame, and perfect the first time. No play in my wheel whatsoever, because you'll want to grab the top and shake it from side to side to make sure that you do not have any slop in your bearings. And I shake the bike loose, but not the wheel. So even if you're not full maintenance in your bike, it is not a bad idea every once in a while to give the wheel a shake from left to right and just eyeball down there to make sure your bearing cones and everything are snug like they're supposed to be. If this wobbles all over the place, you don't have to remove your wheel. You can loosen that one just a little bit. Get your wrench in there and tighten that up to squeeze, where am I at? To squeeze the bearings all back together. Once again, don't over tighten it. Make sure that it's not dragging and it's free, but yet doesn't have any slop from side to side. Just a friendly little tip as we're moving on. Okay, this maintenance part is about done. Like I said, I don't normally maintenance it this much, but maybe once a year. So our front wheel bearings are greased, clean and happy. All of our nuts and bolts on our engine, from engine mounts to nuts and bolts holding our engine, carburetor, and exhaust are snug. This is all important when you come out and it is 2 degrees and you're all bundled up and you don't want your bike to break down on you. You rely on it. It's your sole source of transportation. So take this little time out every once in a while and give it a little maintenance. All right, the last step of the maintenance, lubricating the chain. Now, everybody has their opinion on how they like to lube their chain, what they like to use. I'm just going to share with you my thoughts on that. Now, I have the spray lubricant right here. Why I choose not to use it is because, as you will see, when you spray it, it drools and puts an excess everywhere. And that is not necessary. I think it's a big mess. So I don't do mine that way. I personally use, and you can get it in any of your auto parts stores, even Walmart, I get the cheap engine oil treatment, like STP. Or if you care to spend the money, Lucas. It is a heavy, thick-weighted oil, which will allow it to run down into your chain, because you don't want to just lubricate the outside of the chain. You want it to run down into your O-rings and under each link, because each link spins individually. So I just dip it in there and paint it on there, just like you see right here. No mess. It's not going all over my wheel. It's a little heavier weight than the lubricant in a can, so it sticks to my chain a whole lot better and doesn't all fly off when I start going down the road. That's another pet peeve of mine. When you use regular aerosol chain oil, the oil is lightweight. You get going down the road, next thing you know, your wheel looks like a starfish from all the oil slinging off of it from going down the road at a faster than pedaling speed. I understand everybody doesn't have a bike rack to put their bike in and do this with. I'm doing it the easy way, obviously that way, because I have one. But before I did that and had the center kickstand, I would just move the wheel, take some patience, and lubricate the chain, just like you see me doing now. Because wintertime is important with the oil lubricating the chain. Most people, where they live where it snows, they put down sodium, be it rock salt or liquid sodium, to melt the snow and ice off the roads. Well, when it's melted and it's wet and you ride through it, it sprays up mists. It does get all over your bike. We'll cover all that later in a different video. But it gets on your chain too and prematurely ages it, because rock salt and sodium chloride are a scotch corrosive. So if you got a nice coat of oil on your chain, that gives it a little bit of a barrier between sodium and your chain. Okay, so I will repeat this on my pedal chain on the other side, and then we'll move on to the last thing. One last thing to do. Everybody always seems to skip Mr. Sprocket. Now, I'm not going to pull this one apart and pack the bearings full of grease to show you. Why? Because I did it a few months back. I tried an aluminum sprocket, didn't care for it. Being I had that apart and had my greasy gloves on, I went ahead and pulled it out, packed my bearings with grease. You don't need to pack them to where it's oozing out the cracks. You just got to give them a nice thin coating. Being this bike isn't a pedal bike every inch of its going or every inch of its life, a thin coat works nicely. But during maintenance or whatnot, and you don't want to, or you do not care to, or have the means to, I have mixed up, which is here's Lucas oil and a little 20W50, and I will shoot a few droplets in there. And it will run down as you see it doing. Give it a couple pedals to get it circulated around there. And that is more than sufficient. It is a lot better than nothing. And my thought is, the easier this pedals, the less work I have to do to pedal it. So I'll go around the other side and make sure that that side has a little lube too. All right, the only few things I didn't do, which you might want to do. I did not change the spark plug because I did that one a month or two ago. Same thing with the fuel filter. So I'm not going to change that, but if it's been a while since you've changed yours, doesn't hurt at all to change it now. Also, if you see any particles floating in your fuel filter, that's a good time to change it. But also, if you do see some particles in there, you'll want to peep in your gas tank, because a lot of times bikes that sit get a little condensation in there. You can see that on my storing your bike for the winter video, but I'll give you a brief description of it here. The tanks aren't coated with any special coating. They're just raw steel inside. So if it's only sitting with a quarter tank of fuel, and then the weather goes from hot to cold, creates a little condensation in the gas tank, which could allow the inside walls of your gas tank to rust. If that's happened a little bit and you haven't paid any attention, and you start seeing little rust particles in your fuel, in your filter, peek in the tank. If that is the case, it's time for a new tank. The way to beat that is to keep your tank filled to the top, move my hand out of the way, with gas and oil, or your gas and oil mix, or your fuel, however you want to refer to it. Then there's no room for condensation, and it keeps your tank from rusting and creating you problems. I do that every year. My bike doesn't sit that much, but if it's going to, I make sure, even when it's sitting, that it is full of fuel. All right, that concludes your maintenance for the winter time. You shouldn't have to do anything like this again for probably another year or better. Depends on your super high mile riding. We ride a lot of miles, cold or not, or at least until it gets absolutely so bitter cold you can't ride anymore and feel your fingers and toes. But we do a lot of high mileage riding, so the key to longevity of your bike and its parts, and you not spending the money and going through parts like gangbusters, is a little maintenance. Knock on wood, old Orange here has never let me down, never left me stranded. And I attribute that to just a little care and maintenance from time to time, just like today. All right, I hope everybody starts out the new year on the good foot. I'm glad I got this done today, although I started it in October. But I finally got time today, which is New Year's Eve day, which is kind of evening now. So I will start out 2021 with a bike I can rely on. And from hopefully zero, as in starting off on a fresh slate. All right, everybody. You ride safe out there. I hope this video helps somebody out with a little longevity, because longevity is the key here. That and reliability. That are the main two goals that I go for every time. High performance is not important to me if I'm pushing that high performance down the road. All right, well, stay tuned next year for our first video. And yes, I threw in the corny next year, like it's going to be a long time for next year. All right, take it easy out there.